Good afternoon, July 14th, 2 days after the Calgary Stampede has ended for 2026. What a week. I never went. When I lived in the United States, I never came up to Calgary for the Stampede. So I really wasn't like totally involved with the colonial settler state, we'll call it. But it's amazing, like how the whole city uh, promotes it. I think it's evolving. I know there's always the attachment with cowboys and Indians, the old Wild West, Hollywood and oil and gas and cattlemen. It's just part of the dynamics of how I grew up. My uncles were all cowboys, and my father was a rodeo announcer, bronc rider, and he served in World War II, even if it was just for 1 year. And he didn't see active duty. He still carried on afterwards, still enlisted, I think, until I was like 8 years old. I um, I know he found a career in that for the early part of my childhood, and that had a great impact on me. Again, too, there was very little employment for other people, so most of the time it was my father who appeared to be well off because he consistently had a job with the military. Um, a lot of that too. Um, I don't know the dynamics of how things were back then, but I know there was very limited resources for anybody. And again, I think a lot of the way people grew up who were older than me was either being ashamed to be indigenous, or people looked down at them because were of mixed blood. So this whole concept and the whole understanding of lateral violence I was born into. I'm like I said, my mother's Sioux, and my father's mother was Dakota Sioux, and his father was Nakota. So basically, even though I live in Tsuut'ina, which is Dene, it's not uncommon for a lot of people who have a Blackfoot mother or a Tsuut'ina father, or the father, like just the genealogy is so diverse here that if you did any DNA, and this is what I say, and I prove me wrong. If all Tsuut'ina did their DNA, I do not think there would be one Tsuut'ina who would have a bloodline to either the Dene in BC or northern Alberta, or even in New Mexico and Arizona, which is Navajo and Apache, because we're just so saturated with the influences of Treaty 7, the Blackfoot and Cree and Sioux cultures. So, I mean, that's just the diversity of Tsuut'ina, as well as like the dilemma that our young people have in trying to understand Indigenous languages. Uh, it's heartbreaking to hear stories where, a young man didn't even hear an Indigenous language until he was 15, and that it created an identity problem in the sense that he wanted to learn Tsuut'ina. And bless his heart, he volunteers and he works and he does his due diligence, like really just to understand a language. And yet here I am. I grew up hearing Tsuut'ina, understanding it when they were talking, especially when you're, as a kid, when they're talking about you, you know, or if they're talking about other people. Especially so like when they're really nasty. I remember at the Calgary Stampede, I would sit listening to my dad and others who tend to talk, and or just being around people speaking. And even though I'm a child and they're speaking in Tsuut'ina, I don't think they realize just um, what I picked up in what they were saying about other people. So anyway, why am I on pod? Why am I on a podcast? Why do I do what I do? And the thing is, like, I have so many memories, and the reality of it is, like, when I look on TikTok or social media, and I see Indigenous women and how important it is for Indigenous women to tell their stories, either in poetry, visual arts, podcasts, blogs. Like I've been doing this for 20 years. And the majority of times when I did start my blog, it was just something that I hoped someone would read. And understand this, like with this podcast, like I'll say hello to Darcy and Marie, and anybody else who wishes to, when they see me in public, like come up to me and say, "Oh, I've listened to your podcast." Like I will say hello. I will say hello publicly. Like, okay. And also too, it's the sharing of Indigenous women's knowledge that I try to put into my podcast too, because there are various Indigenous women on social media that I listen to. And one of the young women, I've had the opportunity to go out and have lunch with her quite a few times. And I don't mention her name, and I don't mention any of the women's names, again, because like they have to give me permission to do that. But for her, and just the admiration I have for the tenacity she has when people submit comments on any of her social media, like her blocking, her trying to, putting boundaries in place, protecting her privacy. Like apparently there was this Yahoo, like Gulliver's Travels, where they went to the Lilliputs and the giants and all the horses and all this fantasy of Gulliver's Travels. Like I read it at university, but it was always this romance of people going into different environments and finding different animals or creatures. And so for me, the Calgary Stampede reminds me of Gulliver's Travels, and more so lately because of the different cultures that are coming into the rodeo and Stampede and Midway and all the other events that happen, including the Indian Village. So apparently there was a Yahoo, and I'm using Yahoo in the sense of white young boy, probably in his late 20s, saying racial slurs to an Indigenous young man who was just asking him to stop pushing him. And the rhetoric of racism, like asking him if he wanted to be go home in a hearse or be buried in the graveyards of the Indian residential school like his ancestors. Why do people from the Yahoo community gravitate to such outrageous assumptions that they have the right to emotionally abuse us? Now, this young woman on the social media, she said, I guess people have been backlashing with her and trying to say, well, look at the Muslims. And like, again, I rarely go into the city of Calgary, and when I do talk with immigrants who come into Calgary. And this young woman really has, made me take a aha moment and going, yes, immigrants have more rights than Indigenous people because they are not under the Indian Act. And so if there's racial slurs towards Muslims, hate crimes, they can get the person, a Yahoo would say that to a Muslim, that Yahoo would be prosecuted and charged with a hate crime. Whereas this Yahoo did this to this Indigenous young man, and he won't be charged. The statistics are there. So for immigrants who think that, that Indigenous people have something special, that the government is giving us tax-free money, when really we don't have rights over our own grant, like how would I say, conservativeship or trust, the trust of the money that the Crown holds for us. That whole misinterpretation and how systemic racism has created this fallacy. So under the Indian Act too, because of that, we don't have the same rights as immigrants, like people from